So welcome to the road. If you are visiting, we're so glad you're here. And I'll let you know if you are visiting, but we have been following along. I brought the book up with me. This book called We Make the Road by Walking, and it's a journey through the story of Scripture, starting at the very beginning and going right to the very end. And we're finding ourselves right in the middle. We're in the middle of the year. We're in the middle of the story. And that's what we're going to look at. So we're looking at a story in the middle of Scripture and seeing what it has to offer us today. In that story, it's found in Matthew 16, and it's a curious story. It's one of those stories that I think, I'm going to offer it up like this. It's a story that doesn't give us exactly what to do with it. It's a story that we have to take with us and sit with it and wonder about it, and it's going to ask us a question. So have that in mind as I go over this story. So this story, Matthew 16, it starts at verse 13. And in this scene, Jesus is taking his friends to a city called Caesarea Philippi, which, as McLaren points out in the book, readers back then would know as a place of power. So at this time, it was a power center for the Roman occupation. So the governors, the military people, the people who would enforce Roman law, probably cultural centers were there. This was a place of power, and the people in that area knew it. And before the Romans were there, and that city was there as they knew it, the Greeks worshiped the god Pan there, and before that, the Canaanites worshiped the god Baal there, all in this location. So when Jesus and his friends are there, they're aware that there is a lot of history in this site. There's a lot of power, so religious power, political power, military power, cultural power. It's all kind of right here. And I think that that fact that Jesus takes them to this city is a clue to what happens next. Everyone knew this was a power site. What you worshipped, who you served, who had the power to shape your life, it was all embodied in this one place. And so it's here that Jesus starts a conversation with his friends, and he says, hey, you guys, who are people saying that I am? I wonder if he did it all casually, like, hey, what are people saying? And they answered. They answered, well, the people are saying you're John the Baptist, come back from the dead, or Elijah, or Jeremiah, like you're one of the prophets. That's what the people are saying about you. And that is a telling statement. The people that are following Jesus in these crowds that we've talked about, they are thinking he is going to do something that was done in the past. They are thinking he's going to restore something that happened back then, restoring something that they longing for. So that's what the people thought. And then Jesus asks his friends another question. But you, who do you think I am? What is your sense of who I am as you're following me? And Simon, who's also called Peter, he declares, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And those words have a power. They're full of heft because Christ, Messiah, that meant something. It meant the one they were looking for, the one who would come and save them and rescue them. These people are living literally in the shadow of power. And Peter's saying, you're the one that's going to take us from that power and give us a new power. You're going to liberate us, the one who saves. And then he added the Son of the living God, which in itself was another statement too. So the Caesars at that time, they called themselves the sons of the living gods. So Peter is asserting this as really a political statement. You are the Son of the living God, not that Caesar. And that says something. You're the one with the power to do something about all of this, all of our life. The power to make the world right, to save us. And even when I say that, what comes up in you? Can you imagine standing before a man, a friend, who you are convinced is going to make the world right? Can you imagine kind of that electric air in that space between them, this one fisherman and this one carpenter turned really popular preacher, and declaring, you are the one who's going to do it all. You're going to make us great again. You're going to right the wrongs done against us, satisfy us, lead us to that life. And Jesus replies, oh, yeah, you're right. God must have revealed this to you. You didn't get this from anywhere else. I am the Messiah, and I am the Son of the living God. And now I'm going to tell you who you are, Peter, which means rock in Greek. You get it, and you, on this rock of you, everything I'm working on is going to be built. You're going to have the keys to this kingdom, the power of God's reign to make it happen here. In the Message version of this passage, it goes like this. And that's not all. You will have complete and free access to God's kingdom. Keys to open any and every door. No more barriers between heaven and earth and heaven. A yes on earth is a yes in heaven. A no on earth is a no in heaven. You can almost imagine Peter, well, I can, because this is what I would do, standing a little straighter, like, oh yeah, keys, okay. Yeah, the power to do on earth God's kingdom. Peter's hopes and the disciples' hopes and the crowd of people's hopes and our hopes are sky high, McLaren writes. And then Jesus, as he always does, again and again, he does something no one sees coming. In the very next passage we read, from that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. And Peter, the one with the keys to the kingdom, Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord, he said, this shall never happen to you. And Jesus turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. Those aren't unambiguous words. They're very clear. You are a stumbling block to me, and you do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. And then Jesus said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, their own ideas of what should or shouldn't happen. They must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. And whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world and forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? Now, I have to just insert a little quick aside about the translation of this passage, because I think it does something. This is a familiar passage, maybe, if you've been around some church circles for a while. And in English, thousands of years later, there's kind of been this stretching out of these words, and there's an implied difference between life and soul, where life means kind of your bodily life here on earth, and soul means your other earthly later life later. But in the Greek, the word translated life is actually the same word that they translate soul later. So when Jesus said it, it sounds a little bit more like whoever wants to save their whole life soul will lose it, and whoever loses their whole life soul for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world but forfeit their whole life and soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their whole life and soul? So he's doing this thing where he's setting up this paradox to get his followers to live into attention. Pardon me. He's definitely saying something about denying ourselves and taking up a cross, but it's really in reference to this question of how God's kingdom comes. In this story, Jesus is making clear that it's not kind of the maintenance and the preservation of his life, the holding on to his own security and safety. That's not what the kingdom needs to keep going. And we know that Satan tempts Jesus all the time. We talked about that a few weeks ago, and he did it here again, to gain power to do this really great work in a different way, a way that's not God's way. And so when Peter says, no, you should never die, never give up, never surrender, never let yourself be hurt for the sake of the kingdom, Jesus is like, get out of my face, Satan, because God's kingdom comes about a different way. So we have these two stories side by side about Peter getting what God is doing. He's understanding something. He's been given this revelation, and then given the keys to the kingdom, given the power to make something happen on earth that is happening in heaven, and in heaven that's happening on earth. He's been given a lot of power. And then that's right next to Peter being called Satan for tempting Jesus to resist how this kingdom is going to come. Jesus has just named Peter as a foundational leader in a movement with the power to defeat the gates of hell. Now he claims Peter is working on the side of hell. Do you feel the agony of that moment? McLaren writes. And it's this agony, this really stark juxtaposition of these stories, I think, is very deliberate. And I think it's meant to jolt us like a little bit of a splash of cold water. And it makes us ask the question, well, what is going on? What is going on with this kingdom? On the one hand, there's this power, but on the other, that power comes in such a vastly different way than we are used to or we expect. And it makes us ask that question, what does God do with power? What does God do with power? Jesus in these passages, he's making clear he doesn't disregard power. He doesn't eschew power. He happily is giving it to Peter. Power to create something on earth of the life of God. But there's something in the how Jesus wields this power, how he holds this power, giving up privilege, giving up his status, giving up his own security that worldly power will give us, right? It's not being afraid of giving up that privilege or that status for a truer power to be given room to work, a power that will actually restore and actually recreate, a power that functions on a vastly different principle than scarcity or insecurity or needing to protect or acquire things that earthly power does. So what does God do with power? And how does God wield this power? And what kind of power actually brings this kingdom, actually colors this kingdom in? And what does that look like in our real life here in Calgary? And so this morning, we're going to sit with the discomfort of that question and the unansweredness of that question. I'm not going to answer it this morning. We're just going to sit with it. And that's why I actually like this picture, because it reminds me of kind of just throwing up that question into the air and just waiting and wondering and looking around to see how that might be filled in and answered. I just also need to say, Mrs. Ermter reminded me, don't do this, because it's actually very dangerous. Don't throw hot water into the air, because it might fall on you and scald you. But we can do that with the question. We can throw the question up in the air and ask, what does God do with power? And we're going to leave it there today. I will encourage you to do this, to keep reading these stories in the Gospels. And I think we start to understand how God does power through these little stories. And as we move into Lent and as we move into the Easter season, you might see pictures that help us live into this question, pictures of children and shepherds and welcoming fathers and masters who forgive debts and lepers who are being healed and women who have been given their lives back. These are pictures that will help us understand what God does with power.